Throughout its surprisingly long lifespan, the Fire Emblem series set itself apart from other strategy RPGs by incorporating... Okay, this says waifus, that can't possibly be correct. Supports, that's it! Continually pairing up two units in battle over time would increase their affinity with one another until their bonds could be tangibly improved, granting them in-combat buffs and out-of-battle buds. However, recent entries left a bitter aftertaste in the proverbial mouths of many fans. The surplus of romantic relationships has led to some questionable pairings in games past, but the lack of a non-avatar marriage system in Fire Emblem Three Houses allowed for a return to high-quality supports. For the most part. While anyone would be burnt at the stake for claiming that Three Houses has poorly written supports on the whole, no one can deny that there are still a few stinkers in the bunch. Even the best baked batches can burn a cookie or two, right? Yes, that's a cooking pun, because if I had to deal with sitting through 85 food-based supports, you're gonna have to deal with one crappy culinary joke. Every player has their own personal preference when it comes to in-game conversations. Some prefer a focus on character development, others like a comedy act, and others just want to see some smooching. But regardless of individual tastes, everyone can agree that Three Houses had a handful of exchanges that just left you thinking...
That is disgusting.
Instead of dwelling on what is, why don't we all tap into that good old OP Divine Pulse and revert back to a time when these supports could still be rewritten. Before we spill the tea on Fodlan's worst friendships, we'd best determine what makes the best supports. Everyone has their own unique metrics when it comes to measuring a conversation's quality, but for this video, and any others still to come, we will be utilizing the following standard. Good supports expose the current relationship between the characters in order to help them grow individually and communally. Great supports enforce the themes of the narrative and/or divulge the lore of the world in order to better the player's experience. With that bar set implausibly high, let's take a look at our first fixer-upper couple, Annette and Mercedes. How do these two gal pals measure up to our metric? They may be sweet, but their supports soured a perfect opportunity to impact players. Because our introduction to Annette and Mercedes immediately establishes them as best friends, the support's reinforcement of this information does nothing to enhance our understanding. But Homestead, you say. Their B support pits them against one another. Listen here, Homestuck Fan 47. While the concept of putting a pre-established relationship to the test sounds refreshing, the pathetic execution of that ordeal left the entire exchange lacking. In this case, the thought is not what counted. If we want to salvage this titanic failure, we need to restructure it from the ground up. But before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, why don't we attempt to flush out the current chain's issues, shall we? According to our metric, the primary issue with this support chain is its centerpiece, the conflict. Their argument not only lacked any build-up prior to its occurrence, but it also failed to change either of their characters in its resolution. If we want this battle to be believable, we need to understand what would turn these two against one another in the first place. An initial once-over would reveal that their 6-year age gap and differing heritage could lead to a rift between them. But upon closer inspection, we see a set of foremost traits that could more naturally create tension. Annette's fear of failure, and Mercedes' need to coddle. Annette does not want anyone to see her shortcomings, and thus works herself twice as hard and half to death in order to overcome them despite her frequent screw-ups. Mercedes, on the other hand, shows a distinct protectiveness that can be misconstrued as condescending. No one wants to be patronized by the local mom friend. Mercedes' age actually works against her in this case, because she's just young enough to still be considered a friend, but just old enough to still believe she's looking down on you. You might think that this would be a misunderstanding on Annette's part, but you'd be misunderstanding as well. Let's investigate Mercedes, shall we? I cannot be the only one to think that looking for a friend 6 years your junior is odd, especially when you're a legal adult and your new friend is not. While I don't believe anything suspicious went into this decision, thankfully, it does reveal what Mercedes looks for in a relationship, someone she can care for. Losing a meal took an understandable toll on Mercedes' heart. Even subconsciously, Mercedes would look for people to replace her younger sibling's role, as we see in her supports with Cyril and Felix. But Annette is no one's substitute, and smothering someone can prevent them from improving by their own merits. More importantly, it can overextend the caretaker to a dangerous degree. If this relationship exists too long, it creates an irreplaceable dependence within the one cared for. a dependence someone as ambitious as Annette would not want to keep forever. And here we have our conflict. Now it's time to set the stage. As the curtain opens on their sea support, Annette and Mercedes decide it's time that they take a day off from their studies and instead spend it together. After a day spent shopping their way through town, Annette grumbles in embarrassment at having accidentally insulted a merchant. Stupid imperial language barriers. Mercedes assures her that all was fine. As soon as she explained what Annette meant, they both had a good laugh about it. Yes, Annette muses, Mercy to the rescue. As always. Mercedes tells Annie to cheer up. She's doing her best, even on her day off. Annette begins to ask what that matters, just as she plummets headfirst into a barrel, spilling her purchases all over a nearby porch. Annette apologizes and assures the homeowner she'll clean it up, only for Mercedes to intervene. Annie claims she wants to fix this herself, since it was her fault, but Mercedes says it's her job to help in moments like this, and moseys off-screen to find a broom. Annette mumbles to herself about how Mercy really is a saint, and how at this rate Annette herself will never be. And so their C support ends. Their B support will pick up back in the kitchen, where Annette has cooked up another accidental disaster. Mercedes comes in at the smell of smoke, and muses how Annie always winds up in these situations. Annette responds that Mercy always winds up swooping in to save her. An uncomfortable back and forth begins between the two as both attempt to take control of the now burning food, before it results in a small explosion. The two escape to the dining hall, and Mercy says Annie should have just let her handle it. Annette angrily claims Mercedes sounds just like her uncle. Now, her uncle would just stare in disapproval when she screwed something up, but Mercedes rubs it in her face. Mercedes claims she was only helping. Annie says that if she keeps helping, she'll always need to help. Mercedes doesn't mind. She sees Annie like a little sister, and she'd never mind helping family. Annie says that is the problem. She's not Mercedes' sibling. She wants to be her own person, but she never will be at this rate. Mercedes sadly claims she understands. She won't interfere anymore, and walks off. Annie sighs and says she thinks she messed up more than just the food. And so their B support comes to a close. Thankfully, the structure of the A support is sound enough to maintain without major changes. Both characters can come to terms with the unaddressed tension between them, caused by their respective obsessions with independence and nurturing respectively. Following a confession on both ends, they apologize to one another and renew their friendship. Annette vows to value Mercedes' assistance, while Mercedes promises that her maternal instincts will take a backseat so that Annette might grow on her own. The two agree that, no matter what may come, they will always have one another, and nothing will ever interfere with their friendship again. With that, the curtain falls on both their A support and their entire support chain. That would be how I rewrite the support chain in its current form. But what if I altered the core concept of their conversations entirely? There are 3 alternate approaches to their supports that could shake up the formula all the more. Option number 1, the Ferdinand School of Sorcery. Since education's on the mind, let's play with percentages for a second, shall we? We know 2 things about the School of Sorcery, its name and its location. Yet we have 4 students who graduated from it. 2 aspects for 4 students. Does that ratio seem skewed to anyone else? For such a significant location in Fodlan's history, the game sure does love to brush over the fact that it exists. But I, for one, have questions. How did the application process work? Would someone of imperial lineage, like Mercedes, suffer from discrimination in a kingdom school? Does the same crest-based hierarchy exist in this school's social circles as it does in Garreg Mach? We don't know, and apparently no one wanted to talk about it. But the support chain between these two provided the perfect opportunity to expand the player's understanding of the school. Their friendship started in one school and is now continued in another. Could they not have reminisced about how they became friends, what their classes entailed, or how different their lives were then compared to now? They went from the difficulties of a textbook to the grievances of a battlefield. That changes people, even friends. If the developers wished to stick closer to world building, the two could discuss how their studies in faith and reason magic respectively differed. While Manuela informs us of the difference between medicinal and magical healing, we never are given quite as much information on the rift between faith and reason magic. We know from other games in the series, Sacred Stones and Awakening especially, that light, dark, and anima magic play off of different sources. Some use feelings, others rely on divine connection. Why not tie this into their supports and allow them to grow in their understanding of and experience with the other's source? All of these would improve our understanding of these characters, enhance our knowledge about a significant area in the world, and enforce the themes of the narrative. But that's not the only alternative available to us. Option number 2, the Church of Seiros. Mercedes openly shares her dream of joining the Church of Seiros, be it as a priestess or as a knight, once her studies, or post-time skip to war, end. Annette, as her friend, would want to support Mercedes in this endeavor. But Annette has been burnt by the one she loves, leaving her behind to serve the church instead. Mercedes might not have a partner or a child, but she does have a family, or friends she considers as such. We see little of Annette's perception of the church, but I would imagine our girl has more complicated feelings towards it than she would care to admit. Putting these two into a situation where they must confront the reality of Annette's abandonment issues, Mercedes' willful detachment from her family, and the advantages or drawbacks of serving a religious organization would undoubtedly create one-of-a-kind conversations. But maybe this isn't your cup of tea either. Never fear, I have one ace left up my sleeve. If you don't like that either, well...
You are the worst!
Option number 3, the differences between Adrestia and Faerghus. Mercedes finds herself with a backstory few can understand, and no one, barring her brother, has experienced firsthand. While characters like Claude and Yuri relocated throughout Fodlan in their early years, Mercedes alone has lived as a noble in the Empire and as both a commoner and a noble in the Kingdom. These shifts in status and location would no doubt leave Mercedes with a sense of culture shock, especially given the differences in political climate, religious values, and geographical norms between the two nations. While this would seem centered on Mercedes at first, these discussions could allow both women to evolve individually once the conversations reveal not only the differences in their homelands, but the differences in their values. In both settings, Mercedes submitted to the whims of her parental and authoritative figures. Annette, meanwhile, worked herself half to death in order to achieve her own dreams despite her uncle's disbelief. While these conflicting ambitions could create initial tension, that strain would dissipate as soon as they realized both of them chose as they did in order to win their family's affections. This epiphany could help them both to redirect their intentions toward a self-fulfilling life, be it found in assertion or cooperation. With all of that laid out for evaluation, we must close the book on our rewrite of Mercedes and Annette's supports. What do you think of these changes? The fight scene isn't perfect by any means, as I feel Mercedes' issues are buried beneath so much deceptive nobility that it can make Annette seem irrational. But I'm open to suggestions. Speaking of suggestions, if you would like to see other support chains in Three Houses rewritten, leave a comment below. Any existing conversations are fair game. I am always up for a challenge. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and may the goddess Sothis protect you.